directing a long time, and like I said before, he's kind of like a bit of a sensei to me, but for design. Is that June?
That's June. That's how you can interact with
Hey,
him as well.
June. Can you hear us? We can't hear you.
Unmute. Hello, guys. I can hear you.
Okay, we can hear you.
Just to give you an idea, Shanghai, I guess it's about 9:30 in the morning.
Yes, it's 9:42 exactly to be.
You guys hear that?
Can you guys hear?
We have two accounts coming in. We will use the other account to come in.
Yeah, we can hear you.
But I guess there's a little bit of latency here.
It doesn't appear that way. By the way, can you hear me, June?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Oh, it seems pretty good.
Good. And I think Winnipeg. No, they're still. We can even see the chat. Nope, it's just us. Okay.
It's great to see June. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good.
that's great.
Okay, it's not a problem. Is the Winnipeg guys in here? No?
Yeah, they're finishing.
While they wrap up, we have a door prize
Oh, great.
for t-shirts. So Rick, why don't you draw the number?
Okay. All right. So,
Let's see if the people.
Do you guys have your raffle tickets ready?
Or you can ask your question. If they don't have a raffle ticket, you can ask your question.
okay, so the number, this is a big number. It's 06342672.
Okay. Let's, instead of drawing a raffle, why don't you ask a question about the film and see?
Okay. All right. What is the Chinese name for dragon? You win. Which means dragon.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
So 2 minutes on their side. Thanks for your patience, June.
Not a problem.
Maybe we won't talk about that. Yeah. Are you safe? Everything's good?
Oh, are you asking me?
Yeah, June.
Yeah. We're good.
Great.
June, what we're waiting is for Winnipeg to cut into here.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
The audio is breaking a little bit, so I might not be able to hear everything you guys say, but I try my best.
Okay. Well, you're coming across very well.
Oh, that's good.
Like I was saying, is that if anybody wants to get a link to the film, is that? if anybody wants to get a link to the film, an online version of it, just get a hold of Judy at the. I'm sure there's a contact thing, and I'll be able to send it to you. What's the weather like out there, June?
No, it's good over here. 15 degrees around this. Pretty good. Weather is fine.
That's exactly what we had here. I think 15 or 16.
Yeah.
When will you know that they come in?
I think they'll probably let us know. Or are they actually going to be shown on the screen?
Yes, they'll join us by video. Yeah, they're there. They're live.
Okay.
They're live.
Hey, great. Okay, so they can see us, I think. So let's start. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this this excellent story with us. I guess maybe if you guys want to introduce yourself, Rick and June.
Okay. Well, this was our first major feature film. We've done other films before, but this is our first feature that we've done. And June and I started working on this probably about 7 years ago. June, am I got it right? 7.
Yeah. About that
And
long.
so June was living in New York when we started this, and then since then he's moved to Shanghai. And a lot of the footage was shot in, some of it was shot in Shanghai, some of it was done in Putsai, which is a city that's, what is it, about a 2-hour plane fare? How far was Putsai from Shanghai?
Well, it's pretty far. It's down the south, really close to. Let's say if Shanghai is in the middle of the country, then Pujai is really close to Guangzhou province. It's close to Hong Kong, so you really need to go down and we flew there and take buses and try to find a place. It's really inside the land.
So we have a company, a film company that produces anything from. We're working actually on a feature right now, and we have been collaborating between New York and Shanghai and Calgary since then.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So this is the first feature documentary that you guys worked on.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And it sounds like this documentary, or it looks like it was decades in the making. I know you said you started working on this 7 years ago. But what made you finally decide to make this film?
Well, one of the things that was the sort of the prime mover on it was that there was an event in New York that was celebrating the final, when the Exclusion Act was basically finally gotten rid of, and there was a major show in New York, and we were working on it on a slightly different angle on it. And then we had discovered that this dragon from Marysville was probably the very first Chinese dragon in North America. And so that's when we really officially started to actually edit the film, because we realized that it was not common knowledge that how the dragon was used in the United States. And there's growing information about how the Chinese fought back against exclusion, particularly from legal ways, because, for example, a lot of people did not know that birthright citizenship and being treated equally under the law were all Chinese cases. And so that a lot of that information was coming up. But what was not really said was how the Chinese interacted with the North American population, the greater population, in featuring their culture and how important that was. And it was part of that story that was kind of lost in it. So we felt that we wanted to, feature that and actually show how that the important part that had in forming really, the framework, I think, for a lot of the way the legal part of it was actually framed ultimately.
Yeah, so it didn't start out as that, but you kind of slowly discovered this through this journey.
That's right. In other words, in some ways, the film basically follows really the journey that we basically took. So we originally started it because I was living in New York during the 70s, the mid 70s, and the early 80s, and at that time, at the time of the film, that's when New York City was going through really a terrible time. There was a huge drug problem. They had the first of all, they had the heroin epidemic, and then they had the crack epidemic in that area, particularly around in that area in Williamsburg, which is just across from Chinatown in Brooklyn. And it was really remarkable to meet those people there at that time. And what somebody, Chai Ming Wu, the master that was running it, was in retirement, living in poverty, in the projects, without a nickel. And he took it upon himself, starting at the age of 70, to actually form this multiracial team. And I just thought it was just a remarkable example of how, an ethnic, person that age, first of all, somebody that's already retired, the impact that they had on a community, which was in trouble. I mean, deeply in trouble.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like in the film, there's a picture of you in there with Master Wu. So how did you meet Master Wu?
I met him through, I had been training in martial arts for a long time, and my wife and myself would go to Central Park because we lived in Midtown in Manhattan. And this gentleman came up to us and said, "Oh, you do Chinese martial arts?" He was somebody from Chinatown, and he introduced us to Master Wu. And I remember going to Brooklyn the first time, to Williamsburg. It was a very scary experience going into that part of Manhattan. It was actually quite dangerous. Actually, that's how I met him.
That's great. Well, let's go back to, maybe June can answer that journey of filming this movie. I know there were multiple locations from, California, and then into China. Can you tell us some of the experience that you had, or what are some of the challenges that you had through your journey in this film?
Right. Yeah. Initially, I had no idea we are gonna film this story in so many locations. But as the story grew, we realized that there are places we need to go. We need to find out what happened and what people are doing with the dragon at the time. We in China, we basically had 3 locations. Is Beijing, which is in the Forbidden City. Then we had a couple places in Shanghai, and also we went to Guangdong province. We found this Puzhai village, which they held annual dragon fireworks, which is really surprising that I didn't know. I had no idea about this, and it seemed to me personally it was all distant. The dragon is very distant to me, although despite I'm Chinese and it's part of my culture, but I don't know much about. But as we're filming this story, also answer the question for myself is what is dragon? What did it do before I was born? Right. So I went there, talked to people, all these places. surprisingly, a lot of people are very welcoming to share their knowledge on dragons and show us what they are doing. For example, in Pujai village, those dragon makers, they are proud to show us how this dragon is made, what material they use, and what's the following events they're gonna it's gonna take place. Have you guys watched the film? No, is it afterwards or?
We did. Yeah, we just watched it.
Yeah. So these fireworks are fantastic. It blew my mind. I was holding a camera just right beneath the dragon. It was nothing I can imagine. It's a really inspiring experience to see the dragon in person. The feeling that generates is not something as a how do I put this? Before shooting the film, I can understand. It's just a amazing experience.
That's great. Yeah. Because of that, you said that you talked about how you didn't really know the history of the dragon and whatnot. I guess, what did you learn about yourself and your culture and stuff like that through this journey?
I think I can only answer this question from my personal experience. I'm curious. I was curious about what's dragon is that really about? What does it mean to me, to Chinese, to my culture? It's my journey to figure out through making this film, to figure out basically. I don't want to say too big of a word, but to figure out who I am, the relationship to others. Dragon is, now I understand, it's something that help us to connect to the outside of us personally, to make friends with people in other culture, which is important, which is it's something, if you don't learn, you don't actively to seek the answer, you wouldn't understand. But once you do, it really help you to see the world in a whole different perspective.
I'm going to take this time to open up the floor for anybody who has questions as well. Do we in Calgary have any questions? You raise your hand. We have a mic that can come around to you. Also in Winnipeg, if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat and we can ask the question.
I'll just make one comment
Yeah.
here that just to add on to what June was saying. One of the other reasons that I think that it became more and more of a project is that because the dragon had become such a cliche in terms of its meaning, that in some ways, I think that it was surprising to us the deep emotional connection that people that we talked to had with it. And I think that one of the reasons we want to show this film is because I think that we need a counter narrative to what the dragon is. In some ways, there's a lot of TV shows about it that kind of mix stuff up there, and there's a lot of negativity about it. But I think most of all, it's being a kind of a show associated with trivia and cliche, and then it's kind of lost its meaning, which I think was very. We found that was, in some ways, it's a kind of a tragic thing that happened that way, because as you probably kind of got from our film, you see there's very deep connections to the culture, to the very fact that the dragon has persisted through thousands of years, and it still carries some weight, and it's particularly talking to people like in Marysville, there was a lot of emotion about it. A lot of kind of the respect that people had toward that piece of culture was really amazing, and I don't think that's been really communicated to the general public. I think people see it on the side of a restaurant, they see it on a tattoo, and in some ways it's got this negative feeling. To see that it still has that power was pretty amazing. And even in mainland China, it was incredible. As June was saying, you could see the faces of the people that were doing it. I mean, they wanted to be on that dragon. It's very dangerous, by the way. I mean, June was explaining, those were like fireworks. They were just fireworks. They were rockets that were flying, and the people around there, they were barebacked and without shirts and underneath it.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I think you're right with the idea of the dragging being cliche, because everything you see these days, it's almost like whenever Hollywood does a film that has some sort of a Chinese influence, there has to be either a dragon, phoenix, or possibly a panda, right? So I think that is very true, and I think part of this film is really about discovering what that true meaning is and where it actually came from. So I love that. Okay. So the anti-Chinese violence, that was a very interesting part of the documentary as well. What do you think the challenges Chinese people face today? That Master Wu, he was trying to fix something. So what are you trying to fix?
Well, not being Chinese myself, but certainly being around, the older generation Chinese people, I think that what's remarkable about the way the Chinese in America since the 1800s have dealt with very violent, reaction against them. And I don't know, again, I'm sorry that some of the stuff didn't come through here, but the number of locations that we actually featured in the film in California alone of violence against the Chinese in the 1800s, what was remarkable, I think, and I think it's something exemplary that in terms of, I guess, moving forward, the value of it is that there's two ways to address violence. One, with martial arts, you fight back. This is one of the reasons we included that in there. Is Master Wu felt very, very strongly that there is an alternative way of actually doing it by embracing people and allowing them to participate, I guess, in the culture is a great anecdote to dealing with violence by using violence, because where does that end? It just escalates. And in California, and this is why I thought that was important, is that people don't realize that the Chinese community in San Francisco and in Marysville, they had a huge impact in the 1800s. And that's not being featured. It's in some ways, I think, I'm not saying there shouldn't be a highlight and to explain that there was a lot of violence against this, and it was a horrible thing. But I think that it's also equally important to show how the Chinese community, showing an example to other ethnic groups and ourselves on how that we should actually deal with differences. That these are not walls, these are doors of creating relationships without losing the essence of the culture. It's not about watering down. And that's, again, one of the things that we found in talking to everybody that was involved in the dragon dance within the various Chinese communities, is that there is a lot of they place a lot of importance. They value that portion of the culture. It's a connector. It's like a door to history. So that's certainly was our experience in talking to people.
Yeah. June, do you have anything to add?
Totally agree with Rick. I totally agree with Rick. Yeah. But that part of it was not my experience. It was before I was born, right? But I learned. I study what really happened, and because of that, what happened right now. And within the film, we interviewed a lot of people who had experience, and hearing that, it's really make my heart broke. But seeing them still having a positive attitude and share their story with us really um, helped me to realize what we need to do in the future, towards the future. To me personally, to like making film like this, it's really about the future. It's how should we, based on learning the history, and how do we deal with the similar problem in the future? How do we avoid? How do we get better? That's I guess that's my view on that. Yeah.
Actually, somebody's asking a question from Winnipeg. Have there been workshops for a long time for the dragon costumes, construction of the costumes, training, etc.?
Actually, there has not been. It's interesting because those of you that have been in the Chinese community around it would have seen lion dances, tons of lion dances. But the dragon was very rare in terms of it's particularly in North America. However, it was there. It has been there, and I really don't have the answer to why it hasn't been widely accepted. But one of the theories that has and was brought up by Dr. Barber was the fact that it takes so many people to actually run. In other words, the nature of the dragon, it's a community a spectacle, meaning that it takes many people to do it, and it takes events that are community based. And this is one of the remarkable things about the dragon, that it is done in context with the broader community, and I think that's one of the reasons. So it takes a lot more effort. It takes events and so forth, and I think that we're seeing more of that in places like San Francisco and certainly in places like New York, and I think even in Calgary, it's kind of there's a rebirth of it. There is actually the Chinese Cultural Center actually has got 3 baby dragons that are being actually practiced by little kids from about 3.5 to about 8 years old. So it's
Okay,
I have a question.
Yeah.
The documentary is just over an hour long. I'm just wondering how many hours of footage that you captured to edit it down to just the length it is.
I might have to repeat that for Winnipeg.
Can you repeat it?
Yeah. So the question is that the documentary was an hour, and Judy was wondering how many hours of footage do you have to edit it down to 1 hour?
I think that there is, Junior, correct me if I'm wrong, I think between 40 to 80 hours of film. And I also just want to mention a little bit about the style of the documentary. This is not a typical documentary. We were originally going to base it on Master Wu and make it much more a personal story. But when we started to work on it, and this is one of the reasons that we have so much, we included so much footage, and yet how much footage we had, was that this is kind of a hybrid documentary. It's like an educational thing about the history of the dragon. So it covers a lot of different areas, because when we started to work on it, we were trying to define what the dragon was. What is the dragon? What does it mean? And it had so many meanings, so many different meanings, that we thought we would do this kind of mosaic, this kind of odyssey. And so it has this kind of complex structure, which is not a typical documentary. But there was a lot of footage and a lot of archival footage. There's a lot of stuff that has never been shown, because it's very, very hard, for example, to go into a temple to photograph the video. You're going to have a hard time doing it. It's not something that's easily gotten. But we had a lot of confidence of getting it. So we have a lot of stuff. Secondly, a lot of the footage from the 70s. Again, it's very rare footage. The museum in Chinatown, New York City has a lot of that footage now. But yes, there's a lot of footage on there.
We have a question from Winnipeg. Being a Black man who lived in New York City area in the 70s and 80s, had lived in Shanghai and now in Winnipeg. I note that this film is a very impactful and important culturally for all groups of the world, but for the Black and Latin communities that need to see this. Have you reached out to these communities or festivals?
No, we haven't, but that's an interesting comment. And one of the comments that we've had, and I just like to mention this, is that this film could have only been made by a group of people in North America. Yeah, even though it is a Chinese thing. This is the history of the Chinese, a small part of the history of the Chinese in North America, legitimately. And it's unique because you're right, it covers a lot of ethnic groups, and particularly the New York one. But New York is not unique in that. I mean, there's other cities in New York that had this interaction between the Latinos and the Black community, and many different ethnic groups. It was a very unique thing, actually, because there was a fair amount of prejudice in New York, even in the 70s. It wasn't what people think it was. And it was interesting comment that Rick Lamb from Marysville made about the 60s, that this is a lot of these emotions are very fresh in people's minds and experiences. But I think that's a really great comment. And we've got, by the way, the people that have seen it in Brooklyn, just they love it, because you may not catch it. They mentioned the ethnic groups of what Williamsburg was, as one of the guys mentioned, was essentially its history as a Spanish community. Mm-hmm. And there was an influx of different ethnic groups during the late 70s and the 80s and the 90s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. We only have a few minutes left. You talked about how you and June is working on, because that was my question, what is next? So what are you guys working on?
Well, in really early development, we're actually picking up what we started, which was we're working on a action drama that's based on Mastu's life, and that was the original beginning of it. And now we're basically working on that right now.
Okay.
But it won't be a documentary. It'll be basically a drama action film.
Cool. When is that gonna come out?
Well, that's a tough one.
Okay. It's not going to take 7 years this time.
No, it won't take 7 years.
Okay. Great. Does anybody? Oh.
Just tying into an earlier question you had about the dragon in the modern era, and we're talking a little bit about violence and culture and different responses to conflict. And so I wonder if you had any insight about the military now is carrying the dragon after years of the Exclusion Act, and now it's the American military that is actually continuing on this tradition and keeping it strong. Did you have any insight into that? I thought that was a very interesting part of the film.
Okay, so the question is the military taking over part of this tradition? And
yeah, the American government was excluding the Chinese, and now it's the American military that's taken over and is perpetuating this cultural symbol year after year. What is the significance of that for I guess the message of the power of the dragon to be an ambassador for the Chinese culture?
Yeah, I think what Blaise is referring to is in Marysville. Marysville is near Beale Air Force Base, which is an Air Force base that goes back to, I think, the 1950s. And they are the group that actually yearly, since I think the mid 60s, is now carries the Marysville Dragon at the parade in Marysville, which is, as was mentioned, is the oldest continuous parade held in California, and I think in the United States, frankly, as far as I know. And it's very interesting because the Air Force, the Air Force there is made up of many different ethnic groups of people. You know, so I don't know if you noticed in the film. I'm sorry again, you couldn't see it very well, but it's really a mosaic of people in the Air Force that carry it. You know, so it's to me, symbolically, I think it's very representative of what the dragon is. I mean, because the dragon is made up of a whole bunch of people, and in fact, the southern dragon, the key of it is the longer the better. Now, the northern one's a little bit different, and then they're smaller and there's less people, but they still take quite a few people, a huge team. But their dragon is like, it's like over, I think 60 or 80 people run it. And so it's really kind of remarkable. So yeah, I don't really have any other comment, but I think it's ironic almost, but it's also really, it's beautiful to see this multiracial. But also the other thing that's interesting about it, the dragon is Chinese dragon is so powerful that it doesn't lose its sense that there's no mistake. It is a Chinese dragon, even though it has all these various people underneath it, you know. Yeah.
Well, I think that is the time that we have. Thank you so much for being here and answering all of our questions. And thank you for sharing this film. It was great. Thank you, June.
See you later, June.